Welcome. On behalf of the faculty and staff in the Center for Trauma Recovery and Juvenile Justice, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Trauma-Informed Juvenile Justice. Practical resources for frontline staff administrators and mental health professionals. My name is Rocio Chan, and I serve as a CTRJJ's co-director and will get us started today. A few housekeeping details before we begin to move into content. If you are having difficulties with the connection or any technical issues, please feel free to use the chat function and one of my colleagues will assist you. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the question and answer function to pose questions to any of the presenters. Our CTRJJ research coordinator will be monitoring and managing questions for our question and answers at the end of the end of the webinar. Julian?
Thank you, Dr. Chang. It's a great pleasure to talk with all of you on behalf of the Center for Trauma Recovery and Juvenile Justice. I'm the founding PI and former co-director, along with Dr. Erna Olofsson. And the CTRJJ has been in existence now for 12 years, since 2012, and will be continuing its funding through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, which began in December of 2022 and will continue until December of 2026, and we hope well beyond that. And CTRJJ has a remarkable faculty. So let's go on to the next slide with some pictures. Here you can see some of our faculty members who include youth, family members, judges, attorneys, psychologists, social work professionals, professionals from all walks of life and from so many different professional backgrounds, all of whom are focused on providing trauma-informed approaches and enhancing the trauma-informed services that are provided to youth who are involved in juvenile justice or who are at risk for juvenile justice. So today we're going to be introducing you to a number of wonderful resources. You're going to want to stay for the whole webinar because we're going to be showing you things that you're going to want to use right to the end. Take it away, Keith, and talk about CTRJJ's mission.
Yes, thank you, Julian. I'm Keith Cruz, and I am glad to be with my colleagues and co-presenters, Dr. Chang and Dr. Ford, and I am one of the co-directors for the CTRJJ, and I just want to provide a little more information about the mission of our center. The CTRJJ provides training and education to both initiate and enhance much of the work that is happening on the ground to make it more trauma-informed. Our goal is to enhance trauma-informed services and treatment for youth in or youth who are at risk for involvement in juvenile justice. And we hope to do this and ensure that our work is both one, grounded in implementation science, and that it supports active partnerships and works with youth and families as direct collaborators. And that we prioritize racial, ethnic, and identity-related diversity, equality or equity and inclusion, and that we do all of this while also trying to enhance systemic engagement of our stakeholders in that change process as well. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we've heard all of us mention this term trauma-informed, many times now. And of course, the overarching goal of the CTRJJ is to really support the enhancement of trauma-informed services and treatment. And many of you are very familiar with this concept of trauma-informed care. But as represented in this quote from this recent article, there's really no one single method or strategy that can help a system or to achieve being trauma-informed. It requires a range of services, a range of innovations, policies, and practices. And most importantly, though, is to consider to what extent these practices are really aligned and informed by key principles of a trauma-informed approach. And ultimately, we're doing all of this to have an impact on the lived experience of youth and families as they navigate the system. So our goal for this webinar, as Julian mentioned, if we move to the next slide, is to really think about how it is that we can highlight in our brief time today, a range of resources and practices that support trauma-informed care. And we would also like to let you know how the CTRJJ is here to assist you in your individual journeys or your system journeys at becoming more trauma-informed. And we support that trauma-informed care in juvenile justice really requires intentional efforts across multiple domains listed here. And we're going to highlight CTRJJ and NCTSN supported resources within these domains. So we'll start down this path of resources with a focus on organizational needs. The CTRJJ faculty collaborated with other NCTSN colleagues in 2015 to release this resource guide called the Essential Elements of a Trauma-Informed Juvenile Justice System. This describes 8 elements that literature and experience support as critical to supporting the broad infusion of trauma-informed care. In this resource, each element is described and practical suggestions of how systems can move to enhance day-to-day operations and align those operations with trauma-informed principles. And this is a resource, of course, that is available on our website for download. Now, as an extension of the essential elements, the CTRJJ faculty worked in collaboration with the NCTSN and NCJ-FCJ to build a tool called the Trauma-Informed Juvenile Court Self-Assessment. It provides a framework to promote the adoption, infusion, and sustainment of trauma-informed principles into day-to-day court or agency practices, and it is aligned with those 8 essential elements as well. It really provides a template for what it means to be trauma-informed, and ultimately a method for how a system can analyze their practices, looking at their strengths and weaknesses. Now, one of the things we wanted to do in our webinar today is to highlight some local information and success stories about some of these resources. So with guidance and support, we've worked with 3 different juvenile courts that have piloted the TIJCSA, and in working with them with pretty minimal guidance, they were able to work through the self-assessment and determine that the TIJCSA is something that can be flexibly implemented to meet the local needs of a court or agency. It provides a feasible process that can be equally relevant to a wide variety of jurisdictions, whether that be urban, suburban, or rural. And ultimately, probably the strength of this is it pulls together a collaborative group of diverse local professionals and stakeholders in forming the self-assessment team that can then identify the strengths and weaknesses and utilize all of that to support strategic planning. Now, there are a host of other resources that can support organizational needs assessment and planning, and I won't go through these in great detail here, but just note that all of these resources, whether they be podcasts or fact sheets or other resource guides, are all available on the CTRJJ website, which we will ensure we can point this to you at the end of our presentation. Now I'd like to hand this back to Rocio.
Thank you, Keith. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Think Trauma and Target. A primary goal of Think Trauma is to ensure the training is credible for all disciplines. Thus, we co-train with a secure staff member and a clinical trained staff member. Dr. Kumalo has been, our pioneer and our leader on Think Trauma with version 1, and now we do have a version 2 that was just developed with a few more colleagues. And the training goes to behavioral health specialists, youth development representatives, credible messengers, care coordinators, juvenile justice institutional counselors, and more. And this is some of the reflections that some staff tell us about how Think Trauma has worked for them. And it says that Think Trauma helps us to infuse trauma-informed practices into our daily lives. Some other comments are that during youth progress meetings, Think Trauma helps them to develop and review safety plans and trauma-informed treatment plans. During staff and youth development, It helps them to create wellness calendars to promote healthy coping for trauma and help monthly restorative justice community building activities to address vicarious trauma and systemic trauma amongst direct care staff. So now I'm just going to switch a little bit and tell you a little bit about, you can see here that you can find Think Trauma curriculum in the network. They do have 4 modules and it's easily downloadable. And, you know, obviously we can provide support and training for anyone who is interested. I'm going to switch a little bit gears in terms of telling you a little bit about the work that I have been honored to do with Puerto Rico, and Julian has been also one of the strong supporters of this work. So since 2011, we have been working with a Puerto Rican learning community formed by 2 universities, Carlos Albizu University and Central Caribe University, and several public institutions such as the Department of Children and Families and the Juvenile Detention Centers. In 2016, we started working with Dr. Hilda Rodriguez, Clinical Director of the PhD and PsyD programs at Carlos Albizu. And since then, we have been trained more than 50 PhD and PsyD students on the use of Think Trauma curriculum and Target. Last year, I was invited to present about the impact of child sexual abuse on the first symposium organized by the Puerto Rican Supreme Court, led by the Chief Justice. And we are happy to continue working with our Puerto Rican colleagues. And just briefly, I'm going to mention to you a reflection of one of the PhD students about what it has meant to him to use Target and be trained in Target. And he says, my experience working with Target has been one of much learning and growth. I have applied the model in individual therapy and group therapy. I had seen firsthand what positive outcomes it can create for a person living in a hypervigilance state. One of the most gratifying experiences has been with a female young adult who previously to our treatment had been diagnosed by another therapist with obsessive compulsive disorder. And although the criteria were met for the diagnostic, she also presented frequent panic attacks, intrusive and suicidal thoughts. She had a history of psychological abuse and one event of sexual abuse. This was a case where complex trauma had played a great role in this person's symptoms. Now in front of me was a very assertive female after the Target treatment who knew what she wanted in her life and what she valued. She became an elementary English teacher and moved in with her boyfriend, who has been incredibly supportive of her healing process. So this is one brief reflection on how Target has been meaningful and being used with these students who really are benefiting from this type of training. And then I'm gonna pass it on to you, Keith, I believe.
Sure, and we have another training that is actually supported by the CTRJJ. And this is a training that is very specific to supporting a variety of professionals, particularly who may be impacted by secondary traumatic stress. And this curriculum is known by the acronym RTIP, Resilience for Trauma-Informed Professionals. It's a workshop delivered curriculum design really for non-mental health professionals, but it's also appropriate for mental health professionals as well, particularly ones that work with challenging or very trauma-impacted populations. And so it's designed for professionals who are carrying out trauma-informed practices in a wide variety of contexts. And a really unique component of the RTIP curriculum is that it introduces participants to promising techniques for how to promote resilience and effective coping in the face of trauma-related materials that professionals experience in the workplace as well. The RTIP developer, Dr. Patricia Carrig, who is a colleague and also a CTRJJ faculty member, has offered RTIP trainings to a variety of juvenile justice and mental health professionals, and is actively engaging in an ongoing program evaluation of RTIP's effectiveness in meeting the needs of mental health professionals and juvenile justice professionals in working and managing their own reactions to stress and resilience, and to enhance their coping. And in the next slide, it offers just a few additional available resources around workforce development for a variety of professionals, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and other juvenile probation officers and other mental health professionals, particularly around workforce development. Now, moving into the next domain, we know that another essential element of a trauma-informed juvenile justice system focuses on universal screening and assessment. Now, this could be an entire day-long webinar, given advancements here as well. And we know, of course, that trauma screening and follow-up assessments of youth that are flagged for training is really considered an essential element of a trauma-informed juvenile justice system. But we know a challenge that is encountered in day-to-day practice, particularly among juvenile justice staff, is how to integrate results across multiple screens and assessment tools to support case planning. This has led to a model that we call the Trauma-Informed Decision Protocol, or the TIDP. The TIDP is a 9-step decision model that provides juvenile justice staff in particular with a method of both documenting screening and assessment results, and also highlighting the areas of risk and need that professionals believe are being impacted by mental health and trauma. The TIDP is grounded in the risk needs responsivity model, and we've had some success stories with this model as well. Through pilot implementation in a number of our probation offices, we found that probation officers were able to complete the TIDP with fidelity. And after implementing the TIDP in 2 different jurisdictions, we saw a 2- to 3-fold increase in the number of youth service plans that listed either follow-up trauma assessment or trauma treatment as an actionable item on that adolescent service plan. And really supporting the notion that delinquency risk reduction and strength enhancement can be integrated alongside further assessment and treatment for trauma. And the next slide offers a few additional resources for screening and assessment, fact sheets, resource guides that are supported by the CTRJJ. And I know we keep referring to all these additional resources, and just want to, is we will be making sure at the end of the webinar that you have a clear path of how to access the CTRJJ website that has entire sections devoted to all of these resources, which are then available for download. And now, in moving into our next section, I'd like to turn this over to Julian.
Thank you, Keith. I really want to highlight how valuable the trauma-informed decision protocol is, and it's something that, even though that Dr. Cruz really developed this with a colleague, Ms. Kiator. It's intended for juvenile justice staff, for example, probation officers, but it can be used in any setting, in courts. It can be used in detention programs, although we are happy to see those being phased out in many areas. It can be used by mental health professionals too, when we think through how we're going to recommend and help the youth that we're working with access services. So think of that as something that it's primarily for people who don't have to have mental health training, but it can also be used for any of us who have a mental health background and want to ensure that services are not only addressing the kinds of issues that are crucial in the justice system, the criminogenic risks, needs, and responsivity factors, but also that they address the impact of trauma on these young people's lives and their families' lives. And going back to the workforce development slide just for a moment also, we don't have to go back there, but just as a reminder, the RTIP approach that Dr. Carrig has developed, I really want to emphasize it is so practical because it specifically provides a guide to the strategies that individuals can use to actually recognize and mitigate the effects of secondary traumatic stress. And it's so useful that, in fact, we've included a listing of those strategies in a survey that we've done over the past year, just to identify how mental health and related professionals have been affected by the pandemic. We wanted to also know how they are coping with the impact of traumatic stress on the clients, the families, the youth that they work with. And we use the RTIP as our guide for that. Well, on to treatment. So Dr. Chang has already mentioned the TARGET model. And that stands for Trauma Affect Regulation Guide for Education and Therapy. It's not the STORE, it's a little bit different. And Target has two unique features. I'm a primary developer of Target along with other colleagues and some wonderful adaptations that Dr. Chang and others have done. Target really focuses on explaining how traumatic stress affects the brain. And it shows people very clearly that their brains have not become damaged, but their brains have become shifted into survival mode. And it explains exactly how that happens, how that is a normal, expectable consequence, but how it's also reversible. And Target then provides a stepwise set of skills. We call this the freedom steps that help an individual walk through the steps they need to in order to begin to resolve some of the intense impact and some of the distressing memories that are the aftermath of trauma. It's very practical. It's fascinating because the first skill, which I will just mention briefly, is called an SOS. And that stands for not save our ships, but slow down and focus on your body. And this is something that youth and we as adults often overlook how important that can be. And then orient, which means focusing on whatever is most important in your life or in this young person's life at this moment. And let that be the guiding influence rather than their immediate reactions or all of the distress and stress that they are dealing with, not to eliminate or wipe that out, but to refocus on what is at the core for them and who they are as a person. And then the second S is to do a brief self-check of stress level, which we're all familiar with, but also doing a self-check of how much personal control that young person or that family member or that staff member is experiencing right at this moment, because the whole idea of Target is to enhance personal control. So this is an intervention that can be done individually, with groups. It can be done in family settings, and it's also done in milieus. It's done in classrooms. It's been done in units in residential programs. And it's designed basically to help everyone, the adults as well as the youth, to focus on what is most important and guiding their decisions. And amazingly enough, it seems to have a quite profound effect. We were able to do a test of this in programs that were overseen by one of our colleagues and faculty members, Dr. Monique Kamalo, 15 years ago in two very high intensity juvenile justice facilities that were really the last stop for many of the kids that were involved. And when they received Target, not only did they report that they felt lower levels of depression and anxiety symptoms, which we certainly hoped for, and less intense anger and more sense of personal control, but there was a significant increase in violent incidents and in staff use of force in restraining youth. So this impacted the youth's ability to handle themselves and their stress reactions in a way that made a fundamental difference to them as well as to the adults who were working with them. And we found Target has been done in many different juvenile justice systems, with probation, with residential programs, in court programs, in community-based clinics and diversion programs. And we find that pretty much universally that when kids and adults learn about how trauma affects their brain, that seems to actually help them to feel as though they have now some ability to control the reactions that otherwise seem so uncontrollable and unmanageable. And they feel safer, and they feel a greater sense of trust. So that's one intervention, but that's not the only one. Oh, and by the way, that There's a variation of Target that is specifically designed for staff to follow up on think trauma. It's called T-Care because it teaches staff how to use these same skills, not because they're trauma survivors necessarily, but because we're all experiencing stress. And indeed, many of us who work in the juvenile justice systems have experienced trauma personally ourselves. Then there's another model that's a wonderful model that we've supported since the outset of CTRJJ. It's called Trauma and Grief Components Therapy for Adolescents, or TGCTA. And that's a model that was developed by a number of our colleagues in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. It's different than Target because it can be done individually, but typically in a group with youth. And it involves the actual discussion and the careful therapeutic processing of the memories of traumatic experiences that those youths have had. So Target does not focus on traumatic experiences per se, but on the aftermath and the sense of personal control that we all need in order to cope with traumatic stress reactions. TGCTA focuses on those kinds of immediate day-to-day issues and managing stress, but it also adds a really important component, and that is it helps kids to actually talk through and create a personal narrative of traumatic experiences so that they're no longer trying to just avoid thinking about them or feeling completely unresolved about them. And remarkably enough, when you get young people, including young people who are involved in juvenile justice programs, and they together decide that they're going to support one another in doing this work, it shifts the entire focus for each of those individuals. And it brings out the very best in them. And it also enables them to confront experiences and memories that have been deeply troubling to them that could lead them down the path to all kinds of trouble as they go on into adulthood, but that when resolved actually can become a source of inspiration and a dedication to making a different kind of life for themselves and for those who they live with. A great example of this was TGCTA was done with a group of youth, or actually with several groups of youth, at a very intensive facility, residential facility in Minnesota called Red Wing. And this is, again, another facility which is the last stop for kids who've been through all the levels of juvenile justice and have been pretty much identified as irredeemable, but they're not. And when these kids participated in a TGCTA group and particularly focused on grieving losses that they had experienced, and that is one of the elements, it's one of the components in trauma and grief components therapy that is really quite unique. When they were able to work through the losses that they'd experienced and understand how their grief reactions made sense and how they could dedicate themselves to a different kind of life and how that would honor those who they had lost, these youth made a fundamental shift. And we saw that again, as we did with Target, in a reduction in the number of behavioral incidents over the next several weeks for these same youth who had been virtually, in the eyes of those who were overseeing them, uncontrollable. They became the exact model of what we would always hope for. Again, it wasn't a perfect solution, but there was a remarkable shift. So TGCTA is an intervention like Target that is designed specifically for youth. It has been used with youth in juvenile justice. These are actually the two interventions that we know of that have actually identified or developed specific empirical outcome research results that show that they are both acceptable to and beneficial to the youth and also to the systems that they work with. And as Dr. Chang said, these are also interventions that can be incredibly helpful to mental health and other social work, counseling professionals in training to give them a way to work with traumatized youth and families. Here are some additional resources on treatment models. You can find these all on our website as well. And back to Dr. Chang.
Thank you. So at the CTRJJ, we have been committed to include more information and application of how we can address identity-based disparities. So we have been studying more and understanding more about radical healing. And radical healing involves being or becoming whole in the face of identity-based wounds, which are the injuries sustained because of our membership in an oppressed racial or ethnic group. So wounds also include the ways in which our parents and their parents were harmed and traumatized by racist policies and practices, such as being denied the right to vote, being forced to attend assimilation schools, or being denied citizenship. These also include deep wounds that our ancestors experienced, including broken treaties, stolen lands, enslavement, colonization, exploitation, intermittent camps, and the attempted erasure of these histories from public memory. So we are actually taking actionable principles and strategies that, so we can really include this framework into our own practices. So if we go to the next slide, there are some principles of an anti-racist and trauma-informed organization that the network has provided to us, the NCTSN. We also are becoming more and more familiar in terms of the radical healing principles, which involve critical consciousness, radical hope, strength and resistance, cultural authenticity and self-knowledge, and collectivism. And right now we are working in collaboration with the core curriculum developer and director, Dr. Hannah Grossman. I know that she has helped to co-develop the last vignettes that the core curriculum has completed. And we are actually working with her and a bunch of other people, members of the network, to bring more awareness about how we can include these concepts and principles into the work that we do and into the trainings that we have. So there is more to come on that regard. And if we just go to the next slide, here are many different additional resources that you can also find in the network and also in our website. And with that, I pass it on to Keith again.
Excellent. Thank you, Rocio, and just to echo much of the work in the area of addressing disparities that Rocio has mentioned, we take the approach in the CTRJJ that becoming trauma-informed also requires adopting these principles of anti-racism and radical healing as well. Many of us who are working within the system recognize both the structural and systemic barriers and disparities that exist that impact primarily, youth of color and of various intersectional backgrounds that creates additional levels of system level exacerbations of vulnerabilities. And it's very important that the work of the CTRJJ is firmly grounded in these principles as well. So moving on, is another focus of our webinar is to really learn and to let you all know some additional resources and things that the CTRJJ has in the works as well. And so these are some initiatives that our faculty are working on that I will just highlight for you, and are really things that are coming in years 2, 3, and 4 of our grant cycle as well. I'll highlight a few of these as well. One is a new innovative juvenile justice staff level training. This is a training that is going to be grounded in the Think Trauma curriculum. And it's really going to be a model that is extracting the core principles of what every juvenile justice staff member should know about being trauma informed. We're designing this training as a static, self-paced training that will be accessible via a website and providing a linkage into this portal. It will be an interactive training, but one that can be completed completed via self-paced. And we plan on distributing information about the availability of this training through the CTRJJ website, and we'll be, happy to work with any local or state level juvenile justice system to preview the training and to think about embedding it in your new employee training as well. A big focus of our center is also ensuring that we're getting the word out about recent and innovative research findings and about additional knowledge that we're generating from innovative services that are being delivered to youth and families in the community. And we're doing this through what we call the Science and Services Spotlight. This is a new feature that we've added to the CTRJJ website. And once a month, we will be dropping a one-page PDF that is downloadable as an infographic that will either describe a current study that provides relevant information to raise awareness and knowledge about the impact of trauma on youth and families, or we'll be using that infographic to describe a service as well. We intend for these to be distributed also via email. And they are downloadable from our website and to distribute within your agencies, to distribute among your peer networks and colleagues, and to also consider of integrating them into any of your own trainings as well to spread the word. Another focus that will be happening in years 2, 3, and 4 is the development of a podcast series where we'll be further unpacking and offering up a variety of voices and perspectives on efforts to implement the essential elements of a trauma-informed juvenile justice system. We, as a faculty, will be also providing further support and training and implementation for jurisdictions who are interested in utilizing the trauma-informed juvenile court self-assessment. Julian has provided really nice information on a number of the treatment models that the CTRJJ supports as well. We are in the process of designing follow-up webinars to provide a deeper dive into knowledge about each of these interventions, and then to also consider offering virtual trainings and then booster trainings on specific core elements of the models to staff, juvenile justice and mental health professionals who have already completed training and are actively working with the models as well. It's very important for us to think about sustaining and supporting the work of mental health and juvenile justice professionals on the ground, and we intend to do that through a booster training series as well. We are putting the finishing touches on an upcoming toolkit that will become available on the CTRJJ website very soon. And it is a toolkit that's really designed for mental health providers who may not have deep training or experience in working with youth and families who are experiencing justice system involvement, but need essentially an introductory primer and to enhance their skills and knowledge of the types of experiences and that youth and families who are experiencing justice involvement experience as well. So this is just a brief highlight of things that are embedded in the CTRJJ work plan, and that we hope that you will consider coming back and accessing or signing up for our mailing list, where you will see regular updates on these initiatives. How do you do that? Well, I'm setting myself up for a nice segue. So to learn more information about the CTRJJ and to really stay informed, I'm sure Riley or our staff will drop this in the chat as well. We have developed the CTRJJ website, which is now also, you can just type it in via Google, or the URL is listed here as well. And we really intend this website to be a primary way of staying in connection and in communication with you all in your various jurisdictions. We encourage you to bookmark this website and refer back to it. It is really designed and meant to be a go-to resource for trauma-informed information, services, and resources to support your work with youth and families who are experiencing a justice system involvement. If you want to submit a particular question or to contact the CTRJJ to request any information about any of the models that we support, you can scan this QR code or to access our contact us portion of the website. To scan and subscribe to an email newsletter, email blasts, and/or announcements around new resources, here's another another QR code that you can scan as well, which will take you right to the website and allow you to sign up for our email distribution list as well. And so I'd like to turn this back over to Rocio. Oh, take that back. I forgot. This was my slide as well. One purpose of this webinar is to also really ensure that we have the opportunity for you to communicate directly to us. And so we would really like to hear from you. We have only touched the very surface level on these resources and the different sorts of trainings that the CTRJJ is supporting, and also the treatment models as well. And we would like to hear from you what you would like more information on. So we've created a Mentimeter. For those of you who've attended a training or a conference, you're probably familiar with this, but please feel free to scan with your phone this QR code. Or Riley is also placing the web link and the password directly for the Mentimeter into the chat. But please feel free to, there's just a few questions we'd like to for you to let us know what trainings and resources that you are interested in learning more information about, and also how you would like to receive that. We have the ability to support dissemination of information through our podcasts, through our infographics, through live webinars, through static-based virtual trainings. And we would really like to make sure that we are designing our information and our trainings in a way that is going to work well for you all. So if you would just take a little bit as we wrap up here for today to answer the Mentimeter, we will be analyzing the results and really integrating that into the way that we'll be approaching the delivery of our resources in the future. And now I think I'm going to turn this back to Rocio.
All right. So here are actually a number of organizations that we have the privilege of working with. And in collaboration, we are exchanging wonderful and meaningful information. And, we definitely are looking forward to bring more awareness and more education and learning more from one another, and also learning from you. So we are really hoping that you can reach out to us and we can continue exploring different ways to work in collaboration with one another.
And I'd like to just add one organization that didn't get on this list, but it belongs on this list and we will put it there. And that's one that Keith has actually referred to that was a crucial part of co-developing the trauma-informed juvenile court self-assessment, and that's the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, NCJ, FCJ. That organization has been a really vital partner for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and for CTRJJ specifically. And as long as we're talking about resources and partners, a couple more that I'll just mention that you can find on our website as well. One is several years ago, we co-developed a guide to therapy for children who've been caught up in child sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation, CSEC. This was done with the West Coast Children's Clinic, and we were able to create a wonderful therapy manual that I highly recommend for anybody who's working with youth who have been involved in trafficking, whether it's commercial sexual or other kinds of commercial trafficking. And again, that's available on our website. And working with another wonderful organization, the National Center for Youth Law, or NICL, we actually had developed a couple of wonderful resource guides for working with youth who have immigrated from other countries, especially those who then become in contact with the juvenile justice system or are at risk for that. And we have a guide for mental health professionals serving unaccompanied children. We also have a bench card for trauma-informed approach to judicial decision-making for newcomer immigrant youth in juvenile justice. So those are a couple of other resources that I think could be extremely valuable, whether you're coming from a mental health perspective, a legal perspective, a systems perspective. These are two critical populations, kids who've been involved in trafficking and kids who have gone through and are still going through the incredible rigors and stressors and sometimes traumas of immigration.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to give you a couple questions that came in for our esteemed panelists. One of the questions that came up early on, I think, was for Dr. Cruz when you were talking about the decision protocol. Is that accessible to organizations? And can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure, happy to. The TIDP, the Trauma-Informed Decision Protocol, it can be made accessible to organizations, and the best way to find information about the TIDP is to use the Contact Us and to request a contact from the CTRJJ, primarily me, around the Trauma-Informed Decision Protocol. The TIDP is essentially a one-page form that provides a metric and a way to organize, like I mentioned, information from a mental health screen, information from a trauma screen, alongside information from a risk needs assessment as well. Now, while it's very simple and straightforward, and it's a one-page form, it does require some specific consultation and training of staff on how to navigate and how to implement the TIDP as well. Now, I've worked with a number of jurisdictions on developing a training model to support this, and I'm happy to field any questions and to provide some overview information about the TIDP to anyone who is interested in considering, adopting this approach. Best way to find out that information is to use the Contact Us section of the website, and then we will reach back out to you to have a conversation about some additional resources for the TIDP.
Excellent, thank you. A bunch of folks were asking about access to the slides and the recording of this webinar. So just a reminder that will all be available on the CTRJJ website, which we've posted those links in the chat and can do that again. There were a few questions that Dr. Ford was very busy answering in the Q&A feature throughout the presentation. So just wondered if we might highlight a few of those answers for everyone. So one of the questions that came in was, can Think Trauma be used as a sort of trauma 101 for juvenile justice organizations? So Dr. Ford, do you want to say a bit more about that?
That's exactly what it can be used for. It's ideal use, and in fact, that's going to be an important part of the pre-service training module that Dr. Cruz described, because this really is a way of orienting staff, but also administrators, judges, mental health professionals. All of us need to know about how the youth who are involved in juvenile justice, how traumas have impacted them, so that we're not thinking that just because every youth who is in juvenile justice has experienced trauma, that means that we really don't have anything we can do about that. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because so many youth involved in juvenile justice have experienced trauma, but for each one of them, the experience is different. Their needs and the services that can best help them are different. And Think Trauma just really opens the door to that way of understanding. I can think of a wonderful example where we used Think Trauma and a similar intervention that we call T-Care that's based on Target. And we did this with juvenile justice facilities in San Diego a number of years ago. And one of the lead staff members, one of the key officers who kind of set the tone for everyone, had been a very, very strict and sometimes harsh disciplinarian. And he pretty much thought that these kids just needed to be basically set in order and controlled. After he learned about how trauma has affected you through Think Trauma, and then he learned a couple of the skills that we teach through Target in the T-Care module, he shifted his focus entirely. And he told us, as we did follow-up consultations, I'm now called the candy coach because I'm the nicest guy in the program. And I don't let anybody get away with anything. I'm not any less tough, but now I know how to interact with these kids in a way that is not patronizing them. It's not cutting them any slack, but it's simply understanding that they're just trying to cope with intense reactions that they don't understand. And we can actually help them understand those reactions and also help them develop ways of coping with them that are different. And that changed his whole approach to being a juvenile correctional officer and probably changed the lives of a lot of youth as well. So absolutely, we'd love to see this as a trauma 101. And then if the staff want to follow up that includes some skills that they can use in working with the youth, then the target model and T-Care can be helpful as well.
And Julian and Amanda, there's a follow-up question I'm just seeing is, as someone posted as, what resources could be very helpful for non-mental health professionals like peer support specialists or educators or community health workers? And what I think that I could firmly just recommend is highlighting exactly what Julian is just mentioning, that the Think Trauma curriculum was designed exactly for that purpose, is to raise some awareness about the impact of trauma on and how this looks, the way that it can impact us staff, and to provide a number of different ways of communicating and talking with youth and families who have experienced extreme stress and trauma as well. The T-Care model builds exactly on that framework as well. And we know, for example, that we will never be able to mental health our way out of the impact of stress and trauma. And therefore, we really want to be intentional about, supporting non-mental health professionals, the teachers, the peer support specialists, the community advocates, attorneys, social workers, educators, and actual, youth and families themselves to be able to support one another, through the use of these curriculums, but also models like T-Care as well. As I described it in training and working with that model, you can sort of say, who has stress in their lives? Who needs some skills in ways of managing and responding to stress? Could we add to our toolkits, right? And ways of responding to stress? And usually, there's not a single person when I float that question in the room who will not raise their hand. I think it really does, in all of our goals of supporting youth and families who are either at risk or experiencing justice system involvement, we want to make sure that everyone who touches and works with youth and families has an enhanced toolkit that involves practical skills and resources that are well aligned with this trauma-informed approach.
And let's not leave out judges as well. I
Very.
remember a presentation that I was privileged to do before a number of judges in California years ago. And afterwards, one of the judges came up to me and said, every single one of us needs that. We all need that in our own lives as well as in the work that we do. And she continued to say, I used to think that there really wasn't much of anything I could do, and sympathy is not going to do any good for these kids. But now I can see that there is actually something that we can do that isn't just sympathy. It really is helping the kids and their families and our staff and the people I work with and the judges that I work with to help us all better understand how stress impacts us. And then we can do our job. And the rest of our job, you have nothing to do with, but if you can help us deal with stress, then we can get on with the work.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Keith.
Oh, sorry, Amanda. I thought you might have been narrating this. A question has come up on how, as we see more justice-involved youth transitioning, from juvenile justice, maybe secure or non-secure programs, or back into when they're transitioning back into schools. Is there a way that or any resources that we can think about of supporting educators in collaborating with their juvenile justice partners as well. I think this is a critical, like, I'll soapbox for a moment, but we know that education and meeting the educational needs of youth is a critical element to achieving future delinquency risk reduction, but also really supporting, returning them to a trajectory of positive growth and reconnection into the community. What we also know is that even when these models are implemented in secure or non-secure settings, it doesn't mean that they will automatically transition and generalize over into other settings as well. So one step I think that we can consider is that the Think Trauma curriculum, the TCARE training, even the RTIP training, these are all resources of really equipping educators and arming them with information about awareness of trauma and the impact of trauma, but also some very practical skills to be used in school settings for youth who are experiencing extreme stress reactions or becoming dysregulated in the classroom as well. And so, but I think the question also is, how can we do a better job of collaborating with juvenile justice as well? And, you know, that is, there's no one resource that really will support how to do organizational collaboration. However, in linking in with the resources that we have described today, if there was a jurisdiction or a district who was interested in exploring and thinking about, you know, looking at their system from that trauma-informed perspective, engagement with the trauma-informed juvenile court self-assessment would allow a vehicle for arranging an assessment team where education and probation and the courts and even child welfare can examine what is happening locally within a system, and then what it can really do, and I think a real strong strength that emerges from the TIJCSA, from the jurisdictions that have implemented it, is yes, it can promote a needs analysis, helps to identify areas of weakness or areas of strength around trauma-informed care, but ultimately it brings together a group of local stakeholders and professionals from different disciplines that now have the ability to engage in communication and conversation with one another. And it's been my experience that educators need to be at the table alongside juvenile justice professionals and to really support you. So we really encourage those types of collaborations.
Yeah, along those lines, most of the questions we haven't been able to get to are exactly that, specific collaboration questions, asking for specific resources. So I think we would just encourage everybody, fill out the contact us portion of the website, you know, let us know how you want to collaborate, connect, and help you not have to reinvent the wheel, because there's probably a resource out there that was mentioned today or is on the website, and the CTRJJ team will help direct you to that resource. So do you all want to say sort of a final word, call to action to all of these wonderful colleagues and family members and supportive folks who have joined us?
I'll start by just picking up on the last theme, and a resource that I think could be very valuable. There are a couple of guides that a group of us, including another center in the National Child Traumatic Stress Center at Northwestern University, developed a couple of guides to working with youth in a trauma-informed way who have been or are involved in multiple systems. And that's the crossover practice model, but also just for trauma-informed approaches to youth who are moving between systems and are experiencing all kinds of trauma triggers in those transitions. I think you could find I think you'll find those guides very valuable, and they are available on our website.
And they are also, we have good information about how to understand more about kids who have been in the border and have been separated from the significant people in their lives. And we have had also a webinar about that, and we have worked in collaboration with other experts that can really guide us through understanding more the many different experiences that these kids are going through and what are the things that we need to consider for treatment. I also want to say that, we do have products in Spanish, resources in Spanish too. So Think Trauma version 1 is translated into Spanish, and also Target has actually a lot of the information in Spanish. So
the final thing that I will say is we want to connect with you as well. I'm seeing wonderful comments in the chat about different local experiences with some of the models and resources that we've highlighted. We want to connect and learn from your individual experience and find ways to connect and share and highlight the success stories that you've had as well. We look forward to future webinars and dialoguing with you in virtual spaces and over emails. And thank you for attending today.